hums and consolations of God's Spirit, and very often before the day was ended. In other words, Edwards says, as he documents it, that almost every day that he fasted, something good happened in his life. Thirdly, besides prayer and fasting, here was, in a sense, a very frustrated scholar, which every pastor is almost. Every pastor wants more time to read, as far as I know. I've never met one who says, "Oh, I read too much," or "I get too much time to read." Right. But Brainerd was an extraordinary mind. He was a genius, probably, from his language learning and his bent towards study, and he studied much. Picture him studying. He built 4 little huts in his life. Each place where he worked, he built with his own hands a little hut. And in the hut, you have a candle and a fireplace. No electricity, no computers and word processors, no pencils, and no paper of any significant amount. 45, December 20th, I spent much of the day in writing, but was enabled to intermix prayer with my studies. January 7, 44, spent this day in seriousness with steadfast resolutions for God and a life of mortification, studied closely till I felt my bodily strength fail. December 20th, 42, spent this day in prayer and reading and writing, and enjoyed some assistance, especially in correcting some thoughts on a certain subject. He was constantly writing. Now, one of the reasons this is significant is because we don't know what he wrote. Only the diaries and the journal are preserved of Brainerd. There aren't any other manuscripts except letters. And yet he was constantly writing theological things, and we don't have any of them. He was writing for himself, just like you all should do. Publishing is not as significant as writing. You should all write because you clarify things when you write. You go deeper when you write. You get order when you write. You grow in facility with language when you write. He said, was most of the day employed in writing on a divine subject, was frequent in prayer. Another time, spent most of the time in writing on a sweet divine subject. That's what we just don't have any of. Another time, was engaged in writing again almost the whole day. Again, rose early in the morning by candlelight, some considerable time, spent most of the day and wrote. Another time, towards night, enjoyed some of the clearest thoughts on a divine subject that ever I remember to have had upon any subject whatsoever, and spent 2 or 3 hours writing them. So here's a man with absolutely none of your benefits, none of your comforts, none of your advantages. Spitting blood every day, agonizing in his breast, not adequate food, Indians clamoring for his attention, totally alone, writing, 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 not for publication. And I commend it to you. Brainerd's life is one long agonizing strain to redeem the time, not grow weary in well-doing, and abound in the work of the Lord. Well, let me close with the last section, the effect of his life. The effect of his life. And I want to begin this little section with his effect on Edwards. We know Brainerd because of the impact he had on Jonathan Edwards. Had Edwards not been so moved, we would not know David Brainerd. Here's what Edwards wrote. I would conclude my observations on the merciful circumstances of Mr. Brainerd's death by acknowledging with thankfulness the gracious dispensation of Providence to me and to my family in so ordering that he should be cast hither to my house in his last sickness and should die here, so that we had the opportunity for much acquaintance and conversation with him, and to show him kindness in such circumstances, and to see his dying behavior, to hear his dying speeches and to receive his dying counsels and have the benefit of his dying prayers. Now, what gives that incredible poignancy is that Edwards knew Jerusha caught the disease and died 4 months later. So that he was writing this a couple of years later, knowing that it had cost him the life of his daughter to have Brainerd in his house, and thanking God for the ministry. There's this beautiful description of his taking each of Edward's children aside and asking them about their faith and praying with them. And you can imagine how a father would see one of the most noble missionaries of the day doing that to his children and would be deeply thankful. Well, as a result of this immense impact on Edwards, he wrote The Life of Brainerd. It's been reprinted more than all of his other books and has had an immense impact. And I listed all the missionaries that I could think of who had read and commented on Brainerd earlier in the talk. But if that's true, that is, if you can assemble about a dozen famous missionaries who said they owe so much to Brainerd, how many countless unknowns must there be who fed on and were strengthened by this book? I mentioned colleges. Let me just refer to this briefly. Princeton and Dartmouth, in some measure, owe their existence to David Brainerd, the frustrated pastor-scholar. It goes like this. He was kicked out of Yale. Jonathan Dickinson and Aaron Burr were getting fed up with Yale College. They were behind the awakening. They took Brainerd's side, tried to get him readmitted, and couldn't. The Synod of New York and New Jersey had it up to here with the carnality of Yale and said, when it happened to Brainerd, we're going to start our own school, namely the College of New Jersey, which became Princeton. And the beautiful little touch of providential, what do you call it, irony, is that in October of 46, Princeton was chartered by the presbytery there in New Jersey. And in May of 47, now picture this, he is 4 or 5 months before he's dead. He is at the house of Jonathan Dickinson for 4 months, trying to recover to get back to Cross Weeksham to continue his ministry, and then giving up finally and realizing he's too sick. During that time, Jonathan Dickinson, where he's staying, is appointed the first president of Princeton. The classes begin in his house, and David Brainerd is called the first student of the College of New Jersey. And numerous scholars write about the indirect inspiration and impact that his expulsion from Yale and his passion for the ministry and for thinking had on the founding of Princeton College. There's another interesting story about Eliezer Wheelock. Brainerd went to work among the Indians on Delaware River, at the forks of the Delaware, the Susquehanna Indians. And he felt like a total failure. He worked there a year, gathered a few believers, who later, by the way, went on to Cross Weeksham and joined the community there, but left feeling a failure. However, his journal about his time there was read by Eliezer Wheelock, a friend of his, who was absolutely enthralled with the prospect of working among the Indians there, the Iroquois in particular. And so he took up the challenge among the Iroquois, then moved to Connecticut, pressed on, formed a school, and started a college which became Dartmouth College, owing in a very remarkable way, a significant way, to the inspiration of the journals and model of David Brainerd. In 1740, Yale, Harvard, and William and Mary were the only colleges in the colonies. And they were not sympathetic.